This is Representative Jason Gerhard, represent Franklin and Northfield, Merrimack 25. I'm here with Lu Kang, and we're going to talk about the tax on federal income and why the average person is not required to pay it, and the benefits of not paying it, which I think are pretty extensive. So, lead us into this journey.
Yeah, so here we are. So the idea behind the book, Lawful Tax Avoidance, is that you avoid the thing that you're not subject to. Avoidance is different from evasion. Tax evasion is illegal. Tax avoidance is what's to be done under the law. And the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is the federal income tax, as it is generally called? Federal income tax means one of two things. It can mean the federal power to tax your income, right? Or it can mean the tax on federal income that you receive from the government as a benefit from the government.
I like how you use the example of a Japanese car mechanic.
That's right, yeah.
So lead us through that.
So if I said, hey, I got car problems, I need a Japanese car mechanic, are you going out to the street and asking a Japanese man if he is a car mechanic? Or are you going out to the street to ask a man if he is a mechanic of Japanese cars? You see what I'm saying? So the word Japanese in this case is an adjective, and it describes the car, not the man. So the word federal in federal income tax is also an adjective, and it describes the tax, rather the income. The federal income, that is. It does not describe the tax. So it's not the federal tax on your income, it's the tax on an alleged federal income that you received, which is a pretended idea in most cases, in many cases. Although there are people who definitely receive federal income, not everyone who receives income receives federal income, and therefore not everyone is required to be taxed under those laws.
Great.
Yeah.
So you actually wrote a 30-page pamphlet. It's easy to read. It's not some kind of legalese nonsense, which is what the IRS gives us. Right. I actually have downstairs right now the 2006 version of the code. It's this thick, fine print. And not one person has ever read that thing. I can basically guarantee that. Right. Unless you have some kind of autistic person who has actually spent the time to read it, which I applaud them for doing so, but the average person who's working a full-time job just doesn't have the ability, and I don't. I couldn't. I try. It's awful. I think it's designed to confuse, which is what you're saying. Basically, the wording that they use, their terms of art. So if we can work through the actual lawful tax avoiding pamphlet, and we're going to have to do some editing because I don't really fully understand how to use this program. But we're going to put the pages that we're discussing onto the video so you can follow along. So lead us down this journey, down the rabbit hole, and free us from the tax on federal income.
So I give about, I think, 7 arguments as to why the federal income tax is the tax on federal income and not the federal tax on income. And that takes up about the first, I want to say, 8 pages. All right, 8 pages, double spaced, and I use congressional records, the decisions of the Supreme Court, and also administrative records to show that the federal income tax is the tax on federal income, and it is a excise tax on the privilege of receiving federal income.
So can you explain a little bit, because as far as I understand it, I mean, I may be wrong, excise taxes are different from the apportioned taxes. Apportionment is allowed through the Constitution for direct taxes.
On direct taxes, right.
So if you can just kind of break that down in the most simplistic way possible, it'd be appreciated.
So there are two great classes of taxes. There's the indirect tax and the direct tax. All right. The indirect tax is something that you can avoid. For example, a tax on beer, alcohol, and cigarettes. If you don't drink beer, how much alcohol tax do you pay? Nothing, right? If you don't smoke cigarettes, how much tobacco tax do you pay? Nothing, right? So Those are indirect taxes. They're a tax on a specific product or a commercial activity that you can avoid, right? And then there are direct taxes. Direct taxes include taxes on what they call capitation taxes. So a voting tax, it's a tax on a right? A poll tax, okay. Meaning you're a part of the body politic, and then you're taxed as a percentage of that body politic. So that would be a direct tax. We don't really have that many direct taxes, and you would think that the house tax or the residential property tax is a direct tax, but that's actually not true either. This video doesn't get into that, right? And I don't want to right now, but suffice it to say, the federal income tax is, as we are calling it, the tax on federal income, where federal income is the income you receive from whatever source derived. And that term, whatever source derived, means government sources. All sources of income, all sources of revenue are intended to mean from government sources.
Well, let's walk us through that. And,
sure.
And as you go, say what page you're working off of, so it's easier for people to follow along later on, and also for me when I edit the video.
So these are what we call the controlling words, and that starts on page 9. The controlling words include 4 words. That's 4 words in the entire IRS code, which spans about 3 or 4 million words long. There are 4 words that control the entire code, and those words come from the Constitution. The words are property, income, service, and source. Property, as used in the Internal Revenue Code, comes from Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3, and it means the property belonging to the United States. And that's different from private property, which is under the Fifth Amendment, which you cannot be deprived of without due process of law, and private property cannot be taken without just compensation. So that's a very important differentiation between property and private property. Property is assumed to be government property. The next word is the word income. The word income means income from whatever source derived. And I talk about this as where you find the word source. The word source, up to the 16th Amendment, is not present in the United States Constitution. So you have to go back and look at the states' constitutions. For example, the Massachusetts Constitution, the Rhode Island Constitution, Pennsylvania, and Georgia Constitutions. There you'll see how each state talks about sources of revenue, sources of taxation, receipt from taxes, and general state general revenues from all sources. From there, you can also look forward to the current day, and you can go to the fiscaldata.treasury.gov website and look for how they use the word sources in that website, which is, by the way, is the treasury.gov, right? So they talk about government revenue received from taxes and other sources and so forth. So the word source is not a word that you can find in a dictionary for the definition. It's the word that comes out of state constitutions and as used in current day language. It means government sources. You don't have a source of income if all you do is work for yourself for private interests. That's very important to understand. So then the third word is the word S for service. All right. Service means government service. And again, it's explained in the text in great detail. But think about what services we have. We have, for example, the armed services, the postal service, right? The
Forest
secret
service,
the marshal service, housing service, ocean service, economic research service, postal inspection service, child support and enforcement services, right? All of those are services. And all services mean government services. Looking back again at the Constitution, we see Article 1, Congress shall be paid for their services. Article 2 says the President shall be paid for his Services. Article 3 says judges of the Supreme Court shall be paid for their services. So service means service for the United States or of the United States. Like also in Article 1 about the militia being called into actual service of the United States. So those four words, again, property means government property, income means government income or corporate income or privileged income. Source and service both mean government sources and government service. Now, let me give you an example of what federal income is. Federal income, in my opinion, is all government income, even if it's from a state or a municipality, because all those states and municipalities, they receive some sort of federal funding. So I just give them credit and say, even if it's state income, it falls under the idea of what they call gross income. Gross income, by the way, is defined in Section 61 as income from whatever source derived.
Being the government source.
Okay. Correct.
So whatever government source.
Right. Whenever you see the word gross income, it means government income. Whenever you see the word income, it just means privileged income from a government, from the corporation, or from an exercise of government privilege. Okay. So now, where were we with the? Where was I going with that?
We had the four words.
Yeah.
And now.
Oh yeah, I was given the idea of the examples of income. So first, any kind of government income is gross income. If you get government income of any source, from any source, right, you're subject to pay a tax on that income. The second type of income is if you are receiving money as an officer of a corporation, or if you own a corporation and you have corporate income, that's also privileged income. And the way that corporations are privileged and they receive federal income is this. The federal government, or the government in general, could be state government if you're incorporated with a state, but if you incorporate with a government, your corporation is a creature of the state.
Yes.
For several reasons. One, the state gives you limited liability. Two, it gives you perpetual lifespan of the corporation. In other words, you as the owner of the corporation can be replaced tomorrow and get somebody else to be the chief executive. That's just sign the dotted line and your corporation continues. And the last one is the corporation generally receives trademark protections. For example, your corporate name cannot be duplicated in the same jurisdiction. So because you receive those benefits, those entitlements that come directly from the state and is a result of the state and cannot exist without the state, the corporation is subject to a tax on all their gains, all their income. By the way, that brings me down to another point, which is income as a general term, not a legal term, but as a general business term, means the gain from the conversion of capital or labor or both. In other words, if I buy an item for $1 and sell it for $1.50, my income is 50 cents.
Okay.
Right?
Well, I want to add something. Yeah. So we have Article 84 in the state constitution. I'm sorry, Article 83. The encouragement of literacy and control of corporations, which is really, really important because errant corporations are supposed to be investigated by the state legislature, which they're not for various reasons, corruption. But anyway, the Supreme Court case in 1906, Hale versus Henkel, a really important quote, I believe, from it is, a corporation is a creature of the state. It is presumed to be incorporated for the benefit of the public. It receives certain special privileges and franchises and holds them subject to the laws of the state and the limitations of its charter. Its powers are limited by law. It can make no contract not authorized by its charter. Its rights to act as a corporation are only preserved to it so long as it obeys the laws of its creation. There is a reserved right in the legislature to investigate its contracts and find out whether it has exceeded its powers. Now, this is a whole other conversation, but it's important to realize, even though certain men in black dresses have told us that corporations are people, that it's bogus, number one. But number two, we need to. It's part of my whole campaign platform, which it's right here.
Yeah.
But it's important to realize the true nature of a corporation and put them into their place, and to prevent them from controlling the people who gave them life through the government, which they created as well.
Right.
But anyway, I just wanted to add that I think nowadays it's kind of become this thing where we establish, corporations, they have the same rights as me. No, they don't. They are a whole different animal. So I just want to get that in.
So the confusion behind that is because the Supreme Court actually said corporations have the same rights as persons. Mm-hmm. They do not use the word people. And a person under the law means an entity with both rights and duties. Okay. In order to be a person, you must have both rights and duties. That's in Black's Law's dictionary. But corporations are in fact persons, and they can be treated under the law as such. That doesn't mean they have natural rights. They have rights given to them by their charter. That's it. Those are legal rights. They're not natural rights. They're legal because they've been contractually formed as a function of their formation. Contract with the state. But
that's a whole nother conversation. But I do believe it's something that should be delved into at another date.
Right. The bottom line is, if you're trying to avoid taxes by going through a corporation, don't do that, because that gives them more power than you by yourself, because you have natural rights. And your labor, by the way, the word labor is in contrast to the word service. When you go to work, you don't perform a service. You perform labor. It's your blood, sweat, and tears and time and your effort and your exertion. And your body is yours just as the products of your labor or your body. That's why the government can't tax labor. And there's no such thing as a tax on labor, even though you got a tax on service. Remember? Because service is government service. Right.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. All right.
Cool. Let's go forward.
So, and by the way, keep telling us the pages just in case somebody wants to follow along.
So what we talked about, let's see, we were talking about those words, right? And those words that we were talking about, the controlling words, that ended up on page 13. So there are several of them. Again, property, income, service, and source. Now we're going to talk about terms. Terms are not words. Words come from the Constitution. They're not defined by the statute. But terms are words that may be defined by the statute. And the most important terms, I'll give you a couple, is the word United States. The United States means the District of Columbia in the tax code. It does not mean Missouri, Tennessee, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, etc. Okay? The second term is gross income, which we already talked about. It means gross income means income from whatever source derived, means government income. If you receive gross income, you've received government income. And then a lot of people say, well, I receive wages. Wages, by definition, means remuneration for services. It's what you get paid for services. Therefore, wages, by definition, means government pay. Okay?
Or an officer. I just want to say in here, we're on page 14.
Yeah.
The term wages means remuneration for services performed by an employee for his employer,
right.
where an employee is a government employee or an officer of a corporation. And an employer means a person for whom an employee performs any service.
Correct.
So essentially, an employer is the government, and wages means government pay for government service.
Yeah, so if you work at Wally World, Walmart, you don't have an employer, you're not an employee, and you received zero wages, which means that's because you did zero service. You only did labor. Therefore, you have zero gross income. All those poor people slaving at Wally World,
I know, I feel bad for them, man.
They don't need to be paying a tax on federal income because they never got federal income. They never received federal income, right? So now, the other term that I like to talk about is the term trade or business. Trade or business applies to people who are contractors, for example, carpenters and electricians and plumbers and so forth, and people who work for themselves. And the IRS likes to say, so did you do a trade or business? I mean, that's a question they have, right? The answer is no. You did not do a trade or business, because guess what a trade or business is defined as? It means The trade or business means or includes the functions of a public office. Okay, that's section 7701, A26. So functions of a public office. You're not in a trade or business unless you do the functions of a public office.
Well, as a state representative,
Yeah.
that is a public office, correct?
It is a public office,
Okay,
right? Right. So you are actually performing a trade or business, although you're not being paid for a trade or business. What you're being paid for is wages. You actually received wages, okay? Because you're an employee. You received money from the state.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So let's go on. Here's a quote that I like very much. It is said that when an honest man discovers he is mistaken, he will either cease being mistaken or he will cease being honest. So this is where you want to draw the line and say, hey, what am I going to do? Am I going to go with the rest of the lemmings, diving off the cliff? Or am I going to think for myself and figure out what's right or wrong? And then that's the first step. And then secondly, am I going to have the internal courage to follow what the law says and what I know to be true and right and do the right thing? Because if you do the right thing, you will be rewarded. I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that. So so that's where we're talking about is the idea of tax avoidance is just to be absolutely honest about what you have and what you don't have, and to give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, correct? And retain for yourself what God gave you in terms of your body, your labor, your time on earth, and the products that you made.
And also it comes down to the New Hampshire State Constitution,
Right.
which doesn't give us rights, but simply states what rights we have through God. And one of them is the right of conscience. And you should not be paying money for things you disagree with. Be it the war in Ukraine, the war in
Right.
Gaza, the war in everywhere that the U.S. is bombing, nowhere,
Right.
all day, every day. And so we're actually speaking right now on Main Street in Franklin at the Broken Spoon. I want to thank the owner of Broken Spoon for allowing us to speak here. We got plenty of flair around us. So the point being is, Franklin, New Hampshire's smallest city, where I represent, it's actually, I think it's a great city. The Three River City. But the point being is, the money needs to stay here. We don't need to be taking money out of the city to be spending overseas for things we totally disagree with. And it's important to realize that it's not a matter of, I want to buy a Ferrari. It's I want to spend money on Main Street instead of sending it overseas to be stolen.
Right. And I think what Representative Gerhard is saying is government is established among men and derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, just like it says in the Declaration of Independence. And the IRS and the government in general always gives you a way out. So when you look at, for example, a 1099, a Form 1099, on top of it you'll see a box and it says, check if corrected. Because government wants you to do the right thing. And if you look at a W-2, right? If you pull up a W-2, it says, if this income is reportable, and if you don't, pay the tax on federal income, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But it gives you those big ifs. And if you look for them, it is up to you to determine for yourself whether or not if such a statement is true. And if you use their terms of art and consent to the falsehood of performing a government service, then there's no harm done in their mind, right? You've consented. You've consented to give your hard-earned fruits of your labor away, and that's not unlawful. I mean, that's kind of unlawful because they're tricking you and they're not telling you.
It's scumbaggery of the highest degree.
Right.
But, yeah.
It's not full disclosure, right? And that's a reason for a rescission of contract. But the bottom line is they do give you that choice. And if you want to argue it, you just say, look, it says corrected, and I believe it's wrong, and therefore I corrected it for the mistakes that I saw, and I put down zero gross income because That's what actually happened.
Well,
Right?
I just in the interest of not losing everyone that's listening, because I understand this stuff gets kind of dry, but that's the scam. They try to throw in all of these terms of art, as they call the specialized terms in the law, to confuse you, so people just give up and say, well, it's easier to pay this money that I don't owe than to have to deal with this army of bureaucrats that are going to try to attack me. And so this ties into the real reason we're doing this video. Is obviously I'm going to be running for sheriff of Merrimack County, and Bear has agreed to be the head of the task force to investigate the true nature of the tax on federal income. The sheriff is allowed to create whatever task forces he wants to investigate issues plaguing or involving the people of the county. And I think this may be in the top 3 of the issues currently plaguing us. It's truly disturbing how much stress and time people devote to cooperating with a tax they don't owe.
Right.
It's really frustrating to think about just how many people, and not to mention suicides and other stuff, which obviously it's hard to tie those into specific cases, but everyone knows nobody wants to get audited. I think that's something that most people fear, but at this point, knowing the actual code as it is written, I don't care. Right. So I will actually release my tax filings, which are 0, which in this actual pamphlet shows you at the end how to file a correct tax W-2 or 1099. And yeah, I'll let Bear carry on, but I think it's important that we kind of stand up to the tyrants. It's time we say, this is my money, this is my labor, blood, sweat, and tears, and I don't want it being wasted on things I don't agree with.
Right. So I'm just going to quote the Supreme Court on that. All right. Labor, as is the original foundation of all other property, so it is the most sacred and inviolable. The patrimony of the poor man lies in the strength and dexterity of his own hands, and to hinder his employing this strength and dexterity in what manner he thinks proper, without injury to his neighbor, is a plain violation of this most sacred right. That's Butchers Union versus Crescent City from 1884. That's the Supreme Court writes that.
And what page are you on, just so people can
I'm on page 24.
24.
The difference between service and labor. And by the way, the Supreme Court drew that particular line out of Adam Smith's Wealth of the Nations. And it's been recognized for several hundred years now that labor is what creates nations. And if you tax labor, you're not going to have a freely growing nation, right? The tax on federal income is good because it allows you to keep the fruits of your own labor and to spend it in a way into the economy that you wish. The other reason it's good is because it puts a limitation on government.
Yes. Because
when the government when government workers have to pay a tax on their service, right? Guess what they're going to ask for in return from the government? Higher wages, right? They're going to ask for a minimum wage, and they're going to ask for more wages, which means the government has to be on an even playing field with the rest of the economy in providing services.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it automatically shrinks the government because, first of all, we're depriving them of their unlawful gains, and number 2, we make them compete on the same level playing ground as all the other private businesses out there,
which currently doesn't exist.
Yeah. Right. So the tax on federal income, we should applaud as a beautiful thing that derived from the Constitution and is completely constitutional, and when applied constitutionally, it is a net benefit to society, as is you withdrawing yourself from that system if you don't belong in the first place.
Well, I'll tell you right now, Bear, I've already said this elsewhere, but if we have IRS agents operating within Merrimack County that are not following the law as it is written, I see no reason why they should be banned from operating within Merrimack County. The sheriff, as a chief law enforcement officer of the county, can do that because obviously they're not following the law, and they're harassing the people, as it was written in the Declaration of Independence,
right?
Eating out the substance of
eating
the people.
our substance, yeah.
So,
right.
I think it's time we kind of all stood together, and there's a certain element of society that looks to the federal government or government in general as the savior through these grants and other free money that comes.
Yep.
The city of Franklin, for instance, has been chasing federal grants, and everyone does. Everyone does. So I shouldn't just point it out, but there are strings attached, and we don't need the money. That's the craziest thing about it. You just need to get those people, the federal agents that are operating unlawfully, out of our hair,
right.
And I think everything will work out for the best.
And it's also not real money because it's printed paper, right? And people understand that inflation is eating into your purchasing power, and purchasing power is really the thing you want. It's not the green paper rectangles, right?
Yeah.
And the way that the federal government gives grants and fights wars and do all the things that we may or may not agree with is they essentially print money. And when they print money, they need a mechanism in order to recoup some of that so that they don't so that it doesn't hyperinflate the economy. And taxation is one of them. The petrodollar is another one. Export to other countries is a third. That's why our industries, for example, our heavy industry, our industrial base, has been exported overseas. Of course, that's a completely different subject, but it falls along the same line of problems we're having with fiat currency and the current understanding and application of what otherwise is a lawful tax on federal income.
Well, and I would say just the centralization of power in the District of Corruption, D.C.
Sure.
I think that's really what it comes down to. We've ceded our power to these people that are completely inept, corrupt, and horrible on many levels. So anyway, how can people learn more about this? You have a YouTube channel?
I do. It's No Duty to Submit, and you could just look up honest tax returns. There's a number of videos. They're not they give all this information, but the best way is probably just to pick up this book. It's free, and download it and read it for yourself. It probably won't take more than a few hours, right?
Yeah, it's actually on GoHardWithGerhard.com under the PDFs downloads. It's the first one right there.
Yep.
Because I think this is the most important thing. I don't see how you can fight a corrupt government. Well, point being, I should say, you can't be holding a protest sign in one hand and be handing $100 bills to a government that's tyrannizing you with the other. It doesn't make any sense. You need to either pick one side or the other. If you want to be a tool, then be a tool. But if you want to stand up to unlawful authority, then I think you need to do so by holding your money.
Yeah.
So
every step we take in life is a question of, do I do the right thing or do I do the wrong thing? And before we do those things, we have to know what is right and what is wrong. And if you just assume that paying your taxes is the right thing to do, then maybe you should back up a little bit and reconsider the mechanics and the laws that go beyond that back that presumption, right? And then once you know the truth, again, you got to grow some balls and exercise the truth, right?
Yeah.
And that's not always easy. A lot of people will eventually get into this, and I see people filing honest tax returns more and more often. By the way, this has been going on for over 25 years. And when it started because the internet allowed people to word search the IRS code.
Yes.
And people started figuring this out. And I will give credit to, what's his name?
Pete Hendrickson.
Pete Hendrickson.
LostHorizons.com. He's basically the OG in this whole operation.
Correct.
He's delved into this at a level that's pretty impressive. So.
Right. So go to his website, buy his book. It's called Cracking the Code. Mine is free. Read them all. Put knowledge in your mind, because know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Right?
And more important, not more important, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But what's the most important aspect of this is that a small fraction of time learning this will save you from insane amounts of time trying to fill out all these nonsensical tax forms that don't apply to you, or going to an accountant who's going to get you your refund. It's all a scam. Did you ever realize, this is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The elections are in November, and the tax deadline is in April. It's the furthest point from election day possible. It's 6 months. The whole thing is a scam. And also, what's interesting is that prosecutions for tax evaders will always happen right before April to scare everybody into playing the game. So fear is simply false evidence appearing real. I truly believe that, and I think it's time we kind of confronted this 800-pound gorilla in the corner, elephant, whatever the hell you want to call it, and deal with it. So that's what I'm trying to do through my campaign for sheriff. Also, I'm hoping to have a presentation in front of the Franklin City Council in early September, the first Mondays when they have the city council meeting, because this city is suffering. All places, everyone in New Hampshire is suffering that's falling into this scam. So that's why we want to do this video real fast, kind of give everybody a basic concept of what's going on. Obviously, you need to read to understand what the true nature of how they're manipulating you, and then you can fight back. And most times you fight back even at the lowest level, and they'll just give up. It's because they know they're trying to scam you. So,
right. Yeah, actually, prosecutions for actual tax crimes that don't involve some sort of purpose of evasion hasn't really happened since 2009. That was when Pete Hendrickson was prosecuted back in the day with 12 other people, I believe. When you file an honest and educated tax return, the burden is on the government to prove that you're wrong, and it's very hard for them to do. And if you don't actually, let's say, structure and mix business and personal income, so to speak, with each other, if you just be honest and just put where things that ought to go, where they should go, in whichever box they should go, you will not probably get prosecuted. No one has for quite some time now. Yeah.
Well, if they're going to get prosecuted, it's going to be me getting prosecuted, because I made this quite public.
Oh yeah.
And if there's some way to get a honest IRS employee to discuss this, I'm totally open to that. I'll be under oath. I don't care. This is important, and I think we need to get down to the bottom of it, because unfortunately, most of the government bureaucrats operate in this gray zone, this foggy kind of legalese. Yeah, and it's just frustrating because I'm just tired of this crap. So
right.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
So thank you. If anybody's actually stayed to the end of this, we're kind of running a little long, but it's important, and I think you deserve to keep your labor, sweat, blood, and tears. It's your. Right. You only have so many minutes on this in this world, right. So let's not use them for killing other people on the other side of the world. That's right. Where I'm standing on that.
And if you're gonna work 40 years and follow the regular scheme that most people would follow, that means 10 of those years you're working for the man.
Or if you 8-hour
right.
day, 25% tax rate.
Right. Yeah.
Which most people pay more than 25% tax rate, but even still, 8-hour day, 2 hours of every day
for the man, right?
You're slaving for what?
Right. So if you could spend 2 hours reading this book and understanding, you could be saving yourself basically a quarter of your lifetime's or labor and the fruits of your labor. That's a lot of hard labor, believe me.
Well, It depends what you do. Some people, unfortunately, I think, are on the cubicle life, and they're kind of saying, oh, well, I don't do anything all day. Okay, but what about the people that are really risking their lives? I used to do bridge painting, and I was just kind of fake inspector, but still climbing around the George Washington Bridge, Queensboro Bridge, Tappan Zee Bridge in New York City. The guys that are actually doing the painting and the blasting, they're risking their lives. And I remember one guy was telling me how, so during painting season, they run 7 days a week, and he was telling me how they actually make less money when they work 7 days versus 6 days a week because they get pushed into a higher tax bracket. That's just absurd. Where you have some government bureaucrat spin around on his office chair 5 days a week, and it's on my website, but I believe it's something like 46 days a year federal bureaucrats are provided with paid days off for these fake holidays they create. Yeah. So anyway, it's obviously frustrating, but I'll wrap it up here. Hopefully we can get the requisite signatures to have a presentation in front of the Franklin City Council, and we can move them to have some courage and push this issue forward. Maybe I can win the primary to move to the general election for sheriff.
You will.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think it's important, and I think enough people are pissed off that they're willing to go with somebody outside of the establishment.
Right.
So Bear.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Bear Arms.
Bear
his
Arms.
nickname. He's adamant about the Second Amendment. That's for another video. But I appreciate you being here, and we can get that task force. Its task forces are simply whatever the sheriff creates.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, it's created as of today.
Nice.
And we'll get that going because we need to stop this nonsense, guys. It's time. We got to put our foot down. So thank you very much. Thank you, Bear.
Thank you.
And we'll wrap this up. Thanks.
There it is. Sweet.
All right. Appreciate it, man.